Hey there, Jason Hettler here, and for this section of the Need for Speed course, I want to record a short video to highlight Book 3, Session 4, titled Learning Models. Let's jump right in. First, we have Fitts and Posner, with their stages of cognitive, associative, and autonomous. Through the cognitive stage, we emphasize what to expect and what to do. It's laying the groundwork for education for the athlete populations. As well, information is provided about the errors that will occur. Moving on from there, we have the associative stage, where associations between stimuli and action responses are built. Here we'll see more efficient movement patterns. Lastly, we have autonomous stage, where there'll be an increased accuracy and resistance to stress, fewer errors, and reduced cognitive demands. This lays out some fundamental concepts of motor learning, but I believe we can layer on a few more to gain a better understanding. Bernstein recognized movement as a closed circle of interaction between the nervous system and the sensory environment. This subsequently highlighted the need for feedback. Feedback is a critical part of what we do as coaches, and I think his model, his degrees of freedom model, can serve a lot of purpose for us. His degrees of freedom problem ultimately will say that variability, as we're learning a new skill, is quite high. As the athlete gets a little bit more comfortable with that skill, we'll see the variability drop towards phase 2. And then as they become closer to a masterful mover, the variability will increase again at stage 3. It's important to note here, though, that the variability at stage 3 is process variability as opposed to outcome variability. So if we think of the outcome here at this point, they have many different solutions to that problem. Whereas if working backwards in stage 2, they may have only one specific solution to the problem. So if the environment is perfect for what they're capable of, they will reach the desired outcome. Otherwise, they will fail or we'll see inadequate movement. And so the variability at stage 1 is usually both process and outcome variability. Their movement solutions are all over the place, and the end goal as well is all over the place. We can layer in a bit of Fitts and Posner's model here throughout. Between the cognitive, here in the red on the left, the associative in the yellow in the middle, and the autonomous near the end, it layers nicely over Bernstein's degrees of freedom problem. But I did leave a gap there between the yellow and the green for a reason, because I think that there are a few gaps between the Fitts and Posner model that we can hopefully start to close up, or at least try to understand how to bridge these gaps between an individual learning a new skill and somebody who's very adequate and technical execution is very high for that skill. If we bring in Newell's idea of coordination, control, and skill, we have coordination here on the front end, development of fundamental and technical properties. So similar to the cognitive stage, this is where we're teaching the movement and laying the groundwork. Moving forward, we have the control. Degrees of freedom here are under control. So the athlete begins to understand how to execute the movement, variability starts to drop, but they still don't have the robustness to execute that movement in chaotic environments. Then once we reach skill, defined by Newell as reflection of a dynamic exploratory activity, not the stereotypic reproduction of a static representation of action. So here we have the masterful mover who can execute the skill in a wide variety of environments. Now these 3 different models won't match up perfectly with each other, but hopefully by understanding all 3, we can start to pinpoint where some gaps may be and develop ideas of how we can take an athlete from stage 1 to stage 3, from the cognitive stage to the autonomous stage, or from coordination to skill. Here we have the quote-unquote solution. Ultimately, this is just how I've tried to make sense of it and what I've utilized in the past. So again, looking at Bernstein's degrees of freedom model with the blue line, variability is high at the beginning and at the end, and it drops in the middle. So as a practitioner, I typically will increase the variability through contextual interference when an athlete is in stage 2. So we see the red line for the imposed variability that I will incorporate as a practitioner. If we use a 6-week time frame to try to highlight this, The first 2 weeks, we can think of operating around stage 1. The individual athlete's variability will be high because they're getting comfortable in learning a new skill. And so me as a coach, I don't need to introduce a lot of variability into the movement. I'll get them very basic or easy start positions if we're looking at acceleration, and I keep the cues very simple. For that middle 2-week time frame in the 6-week learning camp, I'll then start to increase a lot more variability, introducing that through contextual interference, which we'll get into in a moment. Here, the idea being that the athlete has a base level of understanding of how to execute the skill, but we need to get them from the point where they can execute it in a very safe and comfortable environment into one that's more chaotic and a little bit more robust with their execution. Then for the last 2 weeks of the 6-week time frame, although an athlete will not necessarily be in stage 3 at this point, I will remove the variability here so that they can leave this 6-week training camp feeling positive and comfortable with the progress that they've made from stage 1 to stage 3. Through those middle 2 weeks, there's a lot of learning that goes on. With learning, there comes failure. And so I don't always want to finish a time frame off with an individual, particularly if it's somebody who's coming just for the off season, with them feeling very uncomfortable with the skill. So removing the variability that I impose can help alongside of that. So I mentioned contextual interference. Through those middle 2 weeks, or that phase 2 of the degrees of freedom problem, I'm going to insert contextual interference. 2 questions though arise. How much is too much, and which variables or concepts do we target? How much is too much is still trying to be answered, I think. It's hard to really pinpoint and give a black or white answer there. Historically, or at early stages, I was hesitant to impose a lot of variability, but I've seen it work very well to bridge that gap from point 1 to point 3, that I've started to use it quite often, and I think the ceiling for this type of work is really quite high. In terms of which variables or concepts we want to target, trying to connect the dots with some of the key words and ideas of sprinting and acceleration that we'll use, we come up with this awfully messy and pretty congested sentence. The patience to apply pressure in a powerful manner leads to large shapes and a full projection, which then bleeds into a rhythmical elevation or rise, culminating in a peaceful completion of the sprint. So with this, we can see that it starts with patience to apply pressure in a powerful manner. That manner is often going to speak to the direction of that force application, and that's often how I'll organize my contextual interference. So here we see some options for a horizontal emphasis: skips for distance, medicine ball throws, bounds, resisted accelerations, prowler pushes, or stick excels. A couple of video examples. Sorry, 1 second here. Here we have a stick excel and a small incline. Reinforcing the horizontal execution forces the athlete to push themselves up the hill and takes out the counterbalance of the arms from the upper body. Again, with the stick on the back, we have a scissor bound bleed. So we have a scissor bound into a dribble. The scissor bound teaches the athlete to strike back and into the ground, and then they translate that into a dribble, which is a little bit more similar to a stride. This is what we call a Borzov heave, medicine ball chest pass from a staggered stance. One thing I'll say about this execution is I'd like to see an athlete carry this out for a few steps. This individual hits a really hard break after the throw, and I'd rather have it be a little bit more of a gradual deceleration. If possible, putting out a crash pad and having them jump onto that mat works really well. Then we've got a resisted acceleration. Slow motion to show the power in the horizontal direction that it's being applied from the 1080 sprint. And then we move into vertical. So a few options to reinforce the vertical nature of force application: skips for height, sprint drills, medicine ball throws, wickets, rudiment, and dribbles. Just a couple of short videos for these. Here we have a dribble bleed. It's an ascending dribble bleed, so it gradually gets larger. That's the range of motion. And as that gets a little bit larger, the athlete's instructed to gradually raise the hurdle board up overhead. Creates a tall posture and forces a vertical strike down into the ground. This is just some of the sprint drills that we go through. Everything's very up and down with a quick switch of the thighs. The ruminant hop series, most commonly known as an introduction to plyometrics, I've often found that it can be quite useful with a lot of team sport athletes to complex along with typically upright sprinting, but sometimes accelerations, to teach an appropriate ground contact. So we've got a relatively stiff ankle, hips and knees are propelling the body upwards. With the team sport athletes, I'll often stick with a double leg backwards hop, or sometimes this here, the left, left, right, right. Hopefully that helps summarize and review some of Book 3, Section 4 on learning models, and hopefully it as well brings another practical component into some of that information. Thanks.